Welcome to Living Legacy Leadership, where you'll be introduced to insights, tools, and strategies to leverage creative living and giving. I'm your host, Donna Kim Brand, creative brain trainer and legacy strategy coach. I help changemakers and professionals who are deciding what's next to develop their thinking, learning, creativity, and collaboration skills, along with leadership mastery for meaningful impact in their next phase of life. The guests and show content I bring to you each week all address some unique aspect of learning, leadership, or legacy. This will help you raise your own game as a leader in business and life, and also showcase some extraordinary people who exemplify living legacy leadership. At least once a month, I also offer a training session to skill you in game changer thinking for your own application. So get your notebook ready or sharpen up your memory by tuning in your attention, and we'll dive right in. We have with us today the wonderful Mr. Ron Donovan. You might, for regular listeners, have heard Ron with us on the show in the past. He's a trusted advisor and coach to individuals and organizations, known for his empathetic and humane approach to leading and leadership excellence. Here, we're actually going to discuss an unusual set of issues for the show so far, and those are issues of living, dying, and grief. So welcome, Ron.
Hello.
Thanks, hi.
Donna.
Lovely to have you back.
It's good to be back.
Thank you. What
an interesting topic.
Exactly. Well, part of the context, in couple of previous recent shows, I've been chronicling a little bit of the traumatic history, trying to be an advocate to my mother, who, in fact, her 91st birthday would be in 2 days, but she decided to let go and pass on to other realms about 10 days ago. So Ron and I were chatting about what we might talk about on the show, and he's just such a font of wisdom and, as I said, empathy and humane approach to everything. And I thought, well, who better to help me sort of flesh this out and talk about issues that we all face, but we often don't talk about them until either too late or when it's uncomfortable. So thank you so much for being willing to talk about this with me.
It's my pleasure. And I realized as I was thinking about it today that we have life, death, and grief. None of those have any solid rules about how to do them right.
True.
Yeah. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, I remember from your book that we had interviewed you about in the past, you have something you call the Book of Life. So how about we start there? Because ultimately what I've found that people who die well have lived well. So talk to us about the Book of Life and how that sort of sets the context for what's to come.
Are you talking about the Book of Lists? It could be that. The last chapter in my
Yes,
in my book.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. That story is about the difference between how we celebrate things that happen first, like first shoes for your children, or the first kiss for the person you marry, that sort of thing, and things that happen last. The things that we don't know even that it's the last time. Like the last time I lifted my daughter up onto my shoulders to carry her around. The last time my son reached for my hand as we were crossing the street. Things like that. We don't honor them because we don't know they're the last. But I think what we can do, if we can live better and say, this is a brilliant moment, this is a key moment, then each of those things that it does turn out to be the last thing, and the last time it happens, can be celebrated even after the people are gone, even in the last minutes of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of living, I think, reduces some regret. I don't think you ever get rid of all the regret that you have in your life, but it can reduce some regret in that you can think back again, remark on how wonderful that moment was.
Yeah, I've heard it said that it really pays to pay attention because we never know when something's going to matter.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. I mean, I had a friend, I found out that a friend died recently, and I didn't know he was ill. I had no message from him. We kept in contact, but between the time he was ill and the time he died, I hadn't contacted him. And I got an envelope full of pictures from his wife and notification that he had died. Immediately, I started regretting that I wasn't there to say something to him in his last days. But we had lived some great times, and I could think about those. I could think about life-changing moments that we had together, and so the regret eased up and moved on, and I did celebrate our time together.
Mm. Well, I had a similar thing happen, but with my brother, my older brother, who when I was a kid was actually my favorite sibling. He was 3 years older than I, Bob. And when he passed away, I was living in England and didn't even know he was that ill, frankly. And I remember, it's much less often nowadays, but for years, I would vacillate between being like deeply sad at not having him around, but really mad at him as well. I was mad that he didn't tell us, so that we could have those talks, that we could sort of finish things off, or I could ask him things that I'd always wanted to know. And because he was a very private person, I never asked him, but I would have if I'd known he wasn't going to be around longer. So it seems like there's all kinds of emotions that come up when someone passes away.
It's really true. And anger is surprisingly powerful and common in that list of emotions. We think they should have done something that we would have liked, but they didn't. And so we have a right to be angry. And you just never know. Like, why didn't my friend write to me? It was like 8 months of illness before he died. Why didn't he write or telephone and say, "Hey, things are going bad for me. Just wanted to let you know." But people react differently to death or impending death, and they may feel extremely uncomfortable to draw people into the problems and questions they're dealing with, so they let it go. But it doesn't mean that you won't be angry. It doesn't mean you won't be smashing your hand against the wall, wondering what the heck, why would they do such a thing? And you just have to let that go. I say that, let that go, but it's not really that easy. I think the best thing I've heard is that grief is really like a shipwreck. You're out sailing.
Great tell.
Yeah, you're out sailing. You're doing well. The people around you, your family, your friends, other relationships are all with you, and all of a sudden the ship hits an iceberg or a rock and sinks. It's shattered, and you're underwater, and you can't breathe and you can't think. And it's exactly like what happens when somebody close to you is suddenly not close to you anymore, either through death or separation. And the best you can do is to get up and get a breath of air before the next wave hits you. You can't really figure it out. You can't really do anything except survive. So you try to float, you sunk again, the waves are huge, you sink again. And after a certain amount of time, the waves get smaller, they get a little further apart. They never go away. And this is the thing about grief that I had a lot of trouble with at the beginning. I thought there would be a moment when I would get back to a normal life. I thought there would be a time when this would end. But I didn't realize until after going through it for a few years that loss, that crash of the ship is a new normal life.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from it. It's simply, that's where you are now. And you have to live with that.
Well, and I'm going to ask you in a minute, just sort of prepare you to think about it, aside from your friend, if there's anyone else who's, in this case, passing, affected you deeply. But I just want to point out, too, for our listeners, I'm sure you know this, but when we're talking about grief here, even though the context of our current conversation is through the passage of death, of an elderly person that I mentioned, my mother. Loss happens that we feel grief about in many other situations after a breakup of someone you've shared a life with. Maybe it's a miscarriage or an abortion. Maybe it's even a job loss or major transition. For a move from your comfortable community that you've lived in a long time. So, and even, Ron, I heard on the radio just a couple days ago, a whole program about people who were still mourning the death of people like John Lennon, who they had the anniversary of his shooting death, which shocked a lot of people and had become the soundtrack of their lives, or people like Princess Diana or even JFK. So any thoughts about that? And then talk about maybe somebody close to you that you went through it with that made you feel like you were sinking.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's right. The grief can be caused by things that you might, before you feel it, you might have thought, well, that's simple or that's crazy. I had no relationship with Princess Diana, but when she died, I felt like it was something that changed the world. Mm-hmm. And I remember when my grandfather died, my father's father, I was sobbing and crying and running around. I was 5 years old, I think, 6 years old. And I have no idea why I was doing that. I didn't know him that well. We hadn't even met that many times. But when I heard he was gone, it felt like a crack in the world. And so I struggled with that for a while. Yeah, I guess when I think about who I was affected by the most, I suspect it was my parents. They died about 8 months apart, actually decades ago now. And I was just swept up when my mother died. I just swept up in a mass of emotions, including anger, including regret. And I was so sorry that I had missed the last of her days where we could actually have a conversation. It was really tough. And I would sink below these waves. It'd be like I'd be driving down the highway, and all of a sudden something, the color of a car, a tune on the radio would make me think of her, and I'd be crying or angry and shouting at the silence of the inside of the car. Mm. And there was no way, there was nothing to be done. You know, there are no drugs for this. There's no, you can think and you can read suggestions about how to quantify grief into 4, 6, 10 steps, however many steps you want to do, but there's no easy answer. And it's clear, I have a brother and a sister, and it's clear listening to them that I was completely different in my reaction to my mother's death than they were. It was just like different universe. And I couldn't tell them anything that they should be doing, and they couldn't tell me anything that I should be doing. It was just dealing with it. I now have a friend, another, and she hasn't died, but she's ill. She needs a liver and 2 kidney transplants, and so she's very ill. And I grieve over that. I wake up sometimes and I think how sad, and kind of struck by the weirdness of the world, how it can touch one person and not another person, one person early, another person late. And I don't really know what to do, even though I thought I had pretty much mastered grief after both my mother and father.